In today's world, we are increasingly dependent on technology. Our business and personal lives rely on it, but as you've probably noticed, it's unreliable. They promise it'll get better, but it usually gets worse. Our computers are slow, so we end up squinting at smartphones and tablets. We live in constant fear that something's going to happen to our personal data, so we're scared into paying for fake protection that proves useless when disaster strikes. Update attacks, fake Wi-Fi, cloud control, and other industry scandals are designed to keep the money flowing. The jokers we pay to fix our stuff have no clue what they're doing, so they do a virus scan and then wipe out our precious photos. Intelligent, successful people feel intimidated by the chaos and think it's somehow their fault. If they only knew what the industry was doing to them, they'd get torches and pitchforks. If only we had someone to explain it all in plain English so we can start protecting ourselves. Oh wait, we do! It's the Computer Exorcist Podcast with your host, Marc Anthony Arena.
From the Wallace Memorial microphone in my home office, overlooking the hills of Western New York, it's the Computer Exorcist Podcast. My name is Marc Anthony Arena, your host. So glad you joined me today. We have another incredible special guest, just absolutely groundbreaking kind of guy here. As you know, on this show, we talk about the implications of runaway technology on society, how all of this garbage is unsustainable, and eventually someone's gonna stop saying, oh yeah, that's just the way it's supposed to be, and someone's actually possibly gonna start thinking, maybe we should do something else. Maybe we should do something that makes life more enjoyable instead of this constant, look at all the chaos in the news. I don't need to tell you. So today we have Marc Winn, who's calling in from Guernsey, and we just talked for 20 minutes before the show, and I just said, stop saying things until I can record you. Marc, tell us about you, and I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Tell me about me. Oh gosh, I'm almost bored of my own story. But
I get sick of my own story too. I'm a parent. I'm a husband. I live in a small country of 63,000 people in the English Channel, in between England and France. The country is 25 square miles. And I'm, for the last decade or so, I've been fascinated by, our community in some way contributing to create a thriving world, and recognizing that all of this incredible technological possibility is arriving, not necessarily being used in a way that is in our individual, collective, and planetary interest. Right, I say it all the time on my show. You have the technology, and we can do so many things, and we are. We can talk to people from around the world. That's great. But most of the time, Silicon Valley uses it to abuse us and record us and influence us and control us.
Well, I wouldn't say most of the time. I'm a bit more of a. I think part of kind of the model of making change happen for me is around honoring the unintended consequence.
And I'll once in a while, when I remember to, when I'm calm, I'll say, look, maybe they mean well. But usually it's just me being, because I'm around occupational hazard, right? All day, every day, I see stuff that the result.
Well, I think from my point of view, I'm like, I've been lost personally many times in life.
Me too.
And so I'm not going to throw stones. and so
You're right. You're right.
And so, I think part of the theory of change in terms of is compassion first, I've met a lot of interesting tech builders over the years, and I've met a lot of leaders over the years and things like that in government and all sorts of things. And most people on a good day are fundamentally good. And a lot of it is frame of reference. A lot of it is we're in a goldfish bowl and we can't necessarily, see beyond ourselves. A lot of it is, the noisy stories of our mind that possess us and move us into making choices that are against our individual and collective interest. And, I like to say as a human race, somehow, maybe for all the right reasons, we've lost our way a little. And from that, from that compassionate place, there's it opens a different kind of conversation. People are less defensive, and so I mean, from a technology point of view, we're in the era where there are some extraordinarily clever people doing some very smart things, but some of those things are quite linear. And have unintended consequences. In rare cases, they're intended consequences. The question I think for us all to face is, as we scale the power of these unintended and sometimes intended consequences, how do we sustain that? And I think a lot about how do we democratize wisdom. Because we are unleashing huge power and huge consequence, and we have to kind of get wise as a species for something more beautiful than we can imagine.
Right. Wow. I try to do that in a tiny way. Like, I do this show to explain what's going on in plain English, because there's a whole planet full of intelligent, successful people who are completely blindsided by what's happening.
Yeah. And it's a spectrum, right? There are people at all levels of the blindsiding. There are people that, are quite awakened to it. And there are people that are so busy with just trying to stay alive that it's not really a priority, and everything in between, right? Sure. So
if you're a parent, you're so busy chasing your kids around. I have no clue. Man. Right? You don't have time to worry about what the cloud is doing.
Yeah, quite. It's just not in your frame of reference because life is hard for some people, and so to me that's what's interesting is like we were talking about before this. I think I was probably inspired a decade or so ago, walking out in Silicon Valley and walking outside the Twitter offices and the towers and, the gleaming wealth and things like that, and seeing people outside kind of shooting heroin and being disconnected. And for me, it's like, and again, I live in one of the wealthiest countries that's ever existed, and there are still people that go hungry and suffer. And it's like, how can all of this incredible wealth and resource and innovation and creativity actually start to reach everyone?
And actually, on a past recent episode, I think I interviewed a guy and he called it, I think it was innovation lag or progress lag, something like that, where you have these extreme heights, right? And I went to a tech school and I thought I was going to be doing something cutting edge, but what am I doing? I'm trying to help people catch up who are just simple stuff like getting people to write down their passwords. Like, so it sounds like that contrast. What you saw is these extreme heights.
I'm not sure it's an innovation lag. I think it's a care lag.
You're right. It's the same concept, but you're right. It's here we are.
Like
with this huge,
I tend to not focus on the technology. I tend to focus on the states of human consciousness.
But it's the same concept. Yes.
Yeah. How we use all these incredible tools is really there's a process of where we are as individuals and communities, and what we care about. And so, the foundation of a lot of my work is really about inspiring people to care more, and going on a journey myself where I've learned to care more about the people around me and the world around me, as I've got older and wiser on a journey of grabbing the electric fence of what feels good in life, and going from like anyone else. And I'm sure I'll look back on who I am today and realize, man, you've still got so much to learn, etc.
Oh, sure. And the times where we think we've got it all is the times when we actually have it the least, right? When we have things figured out.
And that's a continual process of humbling, self-humbling over time and things like that. So, I think we live in an extraordinary time to be alive, where this individual and collective revealing is going on as we're all starting to, the things that used to taste good aren't quite tasting as good anymore, and there's discomfort at all levels in some way, that what, this just doesn't quite feel right. It doesn't taste the same. There's something not quite right with the way the world is, and we all contribute to that in some way, and we're never going to be able to solve it alone.
I call it draining the pool, right? When the pool is drained, then you notice where the dirty spots are.
Right, and we're just going through that draining cycle, and I think it feels really intense for a lot of people to face in the busy day-to-day life of kind of an individualist world. And
it's like when I was thrust into adulthood after college. It's wow. I knew a lot, but I was not prepared for anything. Wow, and you're just thrown into this, and you have to figure it out.
Yeah, and and so we all go through these initiations in life, and I think we're in the era of a global initiation. And I tend to pick your delusion. I tend to pick the delusion where we work it out. And find a way.
It's funny, as a person, I'm an optimist. If you know me outside of work, we're gonna solve everything. We're gonna, I just bought this really crusty house, and we're gonna make it new, and but it's tough when you're in the moment in any situation. Where I always complain about Silicon Valley, because I'm always getting the worst of it dumped on me, and this is awful, and we're gonna 100 years from now we're all gonna be controlled by cloud spaceships, and we're all but you're right, eventually it's all solved. The battle is already won, as they say at Easter time, right? It's already solved. It's going to work out once people eventually learn and stop touching the stove.
I don't know. Maybe it's the solving mentality that's part of the problem. And so
I talked to a friend of a friend. I always say this, and I was complaining about Microsoft, and every engineer goes, well, it's the will of Microsoft, and there's nothing you can do, and you have to go along with it. And I said, hey, guess what? No, I've already got 1,000 people on Mint, and you can solve it. It starts with getting rid of that mentality of, oh, it's someone else's problem, and oh, it's just a way of.
But I use the example of COVID. The best thing we could have done to meet COVID, and we did this to some extent in my community because we had a zero COVID path. But the best thing the world could have done is just stay inside for a few weeks and do nothing. And it would have disappeared fairly quickly, but our restless need to fix and fight created a multi-year challenge, and so I presence this restless problem solving as potentially an unwise part of the problem, and perhaps more spaciousness in terms of how we and wisdom that goes into how we solve things. And I know you're a restless New Yorker, so this is like this is like an alien concept to me.
What I'm saying is just
I live on island time, so so it's like so we speed through the world at a very different.
I'm just saying
pace.
with the optimism, right? It's we're going to solve this as opposed to it's someone else's problem thing. But what you're talking about was another one of my favorite concepts. I call it relaxing the Chinese finger trap, right? If you keep trying and trying and trying and trying, you get nowhere. But if you relax and, hey, let's think about this for a minute, and then you make a move.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the Silicon Valley of move fast and break things is interesting when you start to, make big steps at, 8 to 10 billion people scale. It's like, well,
recklessness and without any consideration for consequences.
Yeah, or the human, the human costs of how overwhelming that may be on an individual.
I see individual consumers every day for my job, and they're massively overwhelmed and they're confused. And then here comes another tidal wave that knocks you over with more. Oh, you need to have an account, and sure,
and so I think a lot of our innovation started with mental health and or consciousness, and a lot of my time is capacity building in my community with the humble cup of coffee, the sacred plant medicine that is that is coffee, and taking the time, hundreds of hours of really getting to know people and what makes them tick. And weaving and connecting people from all walks of life together, and that's a different frame of innovation. But I mean, that's also one of the reasons why Silicon Valley is more successful, primarily because there's this openness and strong connection and strong trust, and so there are some good things in a culture like that drive creativity and innovation. But and in many ways, if Silicon Valley was a city on its own and not part of a federal system, that it was a country on its own, rather than it may be more enabled to solve the challenges that it faces, because Washington is a long way from and so for me
if they could solve their own local problems, right, but they aren't
empowered.
Side note on that, there's a Scandinavian country, might be Denmark, and they actually have an ambassador to Silicon Valley. They're treating them like a country. And I think there's a lot of there's a lot of place for that. I mean, I personally work on the theory that the world will collapse into a network of self-governing city-states, and the operating system for human thriving will happen at the city level, at the local level. And hold that thought here, because this is what we were getting to before we started the show. Is one of my greatest criticisms of Silicon Valley is everything is about ultra-centralization. Right? Ultra-centralized control. They control everything you do. The products they're selling you are now controlled by the factory. So 2 years from now, the factory kills the product that you thought you purchased. They control your every move, monitor your every move, and it's all centralized. However, that's an incredibly unstable model, right? You keep building a tower that's taller and taller and taller. In my book, I talk about playing Jenga, right? You make that tower and taller and taller and taller and taller. It's highly unstable. And so what you're saying, and my advisor Alan talked about this as well, where instead of a tall tower, if you actually care about stability, you do the opposite, right? And that's why I'm so curious to learn about your model, where you're saying instead of a control model, a central control model where someone in a far off city controls you, what's the opposite of that? How and
it's funny in there's a blog post that I write on one of my theories of change, and I also use Jenga as an example in terms of how do you empower communities to start to knock those towers down gently. And for those people who've played Jenga, I think that there are kind of two types of people that play Jenga, and it's a very good game for seeing people's subconscious, right? And because you've got the guys who are really determined and willful and things like that. They got a brick and they just try and push it no matter how loose it is, right? And things
I'm really delicate about it.
And then there are the people who just dance around and find the loosest brick, right?
That's me.
And so I work with a lot of change makers, a lot of activists and things like that. And it's like, in terms of decentralizing power and decentralization in general, a lot of people are trying to fight and push the hardest brick all the time. And I'm like, this is more of a, martial art than a boxing fight, right? This is how do you gradually, playfully tap the loosest bricks of all of these kind of, and this is
trying to do it through education, right? Because I know there are enough people out there who are willing, like when I install Mint for people, right? It's an alternative for Windows and Mac, and there are enough people who are willing to listen that I don't need to butt heads with someone who's not ready for it.
Yeah, and so there's 8 billion people, and just work with the next 10 loosest bricks, right? And then trust that when when you play Jenga, something that was really difficult 5 rounds beforehand suddenly becomes super loose and super easy.
Because when I make this group of people happy, their friends will come next. Wow.
Right. And so we had a core in terms of our culture hacking model, I suppose, of change in our is to always be tapping loose bricks and trusting that there's a state shift that will happen in every community at some point. When you get the early adopters that really want to try something new or try something different, or already get a deep sense of what a new world feels like and are willing to speak to it and move to it and act towards it. And then it's about inviting them in, trusting that it spreads like a virus all the time, and gradually you get a cultural transformation over time, and you get people within, and that's the same with being an activist, creating a virus of care within Apple or Google or any of these things. It's like ultimately they're full of human beings that
who are doing the right thing in their own world, and they're doing what they think is right. And you're right, and I forget that sometimes, but absolutely. They're doing. So, and let me get this straight here. So just for our listeners here, because we're throwing out so many great things, but so you have a country. It's an independent country that operates.
Well, I don't have a country. I'm a humble citizen of a country.
Okay, right. So you're in this country,
and I just have coffee. But
you're there, and it's basically a social experiment to try to create stability using local, right, as opposed to a large scale. What you're saying is things are more stable when you're a local, small thing instead of a tall tower. Is that right?
Well, I mean, we were a highly resilient jurisdiction during COVID. We had very little COVID for most of that 2 years. We're an extraordinarily cohesive, strong, caring outcome. But we're 25 square miles, high trusting, high reliance on each other. And we care about each other. And we're at that kind of, we're a town and a country, and we were just lucky to be the right kind of size to do well. And, our relative cost of COVID is very, very low.
But even beyond COVID, it's, as opposed to like Manhattan, the city of strangers, where, someone can kill someone in the street and people walk by and ignore it, right? So you're doing the opposite of that.
Well, it was a city of strangers, but I always use the example of when the power went out in New York, everybody started talking to each other.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Instead of this quote-unquote connected world where we're all in our bedrooms separated.
And so there's something astonishing about waves of chaos in terms of in regenerative systems, they have the capacity to bring us all closer together and work together. In systems where the culture is still degenerative, they can create chaos. But I always use that example of the lights going out in New York and people first time meeting each other and things like that. And so we have these kind of opportunities with these opportunities that are going to come up as we go, as many of our old systems collapse and as we move into new ones through disruption by technology or climate change or social unrest or financial collapse or whatever we've got coming in the next decade. It's an opportunity to say that we can't do this alone, like we couldn't do it alone with the light when the lights went out in New York. We actually have to do this together. And that's a little awkward and uncomfortable at first. And we need some of these situations to actually show that when we rely on each other in some way, and we trust more, magic can happen. And so, I happen to be extraordinarily blessed to live in a very kind of trusting country naturally, because we have an island and a moat around us and things like that. So it's a bit of a walled garden. But my view was always like, how do we use this in a way that contributes to the world?
You could have other models just like this. If this succeeds, you have other models, and you don't have to be your country doesn't have to take over other countries, right? We teach the models, like, so other decentralized groups.
Well, there's this argument between left and right, say, in a lot of countries between, pay more tax or make more money. And Guernsey's a country that we have most infrastructure, even though we're only 25, so we're a subscale jurisdiction, but we've got very low tax rates, but we have probably Nordic level social outcomes or getting close to it. And it's like, well, how do they do that? How do you get a place where left and right are doing okay? And it comes down to people caring about each other. I use the example, if you care enough to pick up a piece of litter that you didn't drop in the street,
treat it like your own home, right? If everyone's like that, sure.
Then your tax bill is less. But you have to feel like you have a stake in community and a stake in society for you to be able to do that.
Instead of what I said earlier, which is just a lot of people I know, oh, whatever, bro, it's someone else's problem, bro. Just don't worry. Just sell as much as you can to make your quota, and everything else is someone else's problem.
Right. And so if you, like the people shooting heroin outside the Twitter offices, there's a point where if you leave it for long enough, it starts to, the city starts to collapse, right? Because if it's someone else's problem, and I just sort my own, and then to be complaining about tax going up, and then not actually realizing that you won't pick a piece of litter up off the street. But
it's so indirect. It's kind of like with elder care, right? If no matter how good the nursing home is and how good the nurses are and all that, right, they're still not taking care of their own grandparent. Right, it's still never going to be as good as a family home where you're taking care of your own grandparent, no matter how good.
And this is the problem with industrialization. And we've warehoused our old people in age, and we've warehoused our children in development. Wow. Whereas we are designed to be multi-generational hunter-gatherer beings, where the young learn off the old and wisdom is passed.
That's the only reason I'm so successful. I learned from my grandparents. I had them around. Right. I didn't throw them somewhere.
And so when we think about what this next wave of innovation and technology needs to do, it needs to reweave the village back together, and the systems need to... and we need to go away from siloism and linear thinking, which have these unintended consequences of loneliness and isolation and things like that, which you often see algorithmically. A lot of voters are old and they're being manipulated into more extreme views and things like that.
And I deal with seniors every day, right? And I get along with all of them, left and right and whatever. But you know what's funny is all of the emails they get are templates. And it's just the template, they just switch the names. So it's Trump's taking away our freedom, Pelosi's taking away our freedom, Biden's... But it's the same email. Just different names put in.
We find in our community you'll get a keyboard warrior or something like that, that may be an older person that has all these kind of views and things like that.
Warrior.
But you actually, because I live in a community where you can go and meet the people that are, and then usually they're alone or disconnected or things like that. And as soon as they find purpose or connection in community, the whole online discourse changes.
Right, 'cause you don't just type away at an anonymous thing. You're faced with a person.
You're expressing suppressed rage or disconnection or isolation and things like that.
And if you get out there, and I always tell people, just go out in your community and find a problem you can solve instead of that helplessness of watching the news.
Yeah, and trust that there's people who care doing that everywhere in the world, right? And I think it comes down to trust and faith in humanity, right? I think I'm really blessed because I hang out with people doing incredible things every day, and I'm like they exist in every community in the world. There are people that care everywhere, and they're working it out, and they're getting access to better and better tools and things like that, and they're doing incredible and amazing things. And I'm sure we all have stories of wonder in our own communities, and they're really caring people, and they're building communities of support around each other, and there really are kind of these imaginal cells that exist within each and every community in the world, and that are bringing forward an incredible world.
You're enabling people to be the best they can instead of people at their worst. I live in a neighborhood full of people who are sitting alone smoking. They just smoke all day and watch the news, and that's it, by themselves.
But if you study addiction, the antidote to addiction is connection, right? And
wow. This show, folks, this show just went to a whole new level. It used to be just a tech talk show. This whole new level today.
What it is, I mean, and so it's like, how do we, we've got, an attention economy, but really, we fundamentally need to, which drives isolation and disconnection, but we need to make fundamentally connection more profitable than attention. And if we crack that, then we can weave together an incredible world. And there are aspects of this, it's within the missions of Facebook and Apple and things like that. So these guys will gradually work it out that, people are wanting a completely different kind of experience. They're wanting these tools to support us to fall in love, to make reality great again, is the meme I use.
Make reality great again.
And I think there will be waves of new technology that support us in that process of coming home to each other, and because deep down we know what it really feels like to be in strong, deep connection with other human beings. We've all experienced it at some point, or at least I hope we have.
We're looking to get back there.
Yeah, that's why I'm in a crisis.
I look to get back to where I was comfortable.
And whether we smoke or we drink or we eat too much food or we binge watch Netflix, or it's all about feeling connected, and so, or escaping the emotion of loss or loneliness or disconnection and things like that. So once we start to really understand, and technology can support us in that understanding and awareness, creating and help us softly guide us back to the stuff that truly matters for human thriving, then that is the essence of how a greater world can emerge. And so I've just become extraordinarily fascinated in that potential of what happens when we return to each other, return to the village, and I see it in my community over the last 10, 15 years in terms of
wow. And I've always wondered, but I've never. I mean, you guys did it. You guys implemented.
Well, I mean, we've got problems like everywhere else.
Sure.
But we tend to be a place that often does something about them. Not always.
You're resilient. Yes, there are problems, and that's the thing. That's actually, you just hit on a huge thing, because a lot of times people who are idealists think, I'm going to eliminate problems. No, it's how do we handle them in a way. New ones arrive
all the time. COVID is like, it's not.
Yeah, and people tell me, you need a virus scanner. You need a virus scanner. No, how about building a house made out of bricks? Right? Yeah, so that the problems come, and it's just, the user is aware, right? I teach my clients how to be aware, so that you don't need to rely on, it's how to be resilient.
Yeah, I mean, because you get this desire for certainty, and this is a very, very, very modern thing, and it's like, it's
a lot of people pay a lot of money for that fake sense of security, that big green checkbox that Norton gives you, that fake certainty.
Yeah, and it is, for me, it's like, how do we thrive in uncertainty? And that is a completely different frame of innovation.
That's another episode.
And that really is, but that's uncomfortable. because that is a surrendering to something beyond yourself. And it is like a deeper discussion about spirituality and and things like that.
That's another episode too.
But we're in that era where science, technology, spirituality are all kind of converging in some way, and
whether or not you like it, it's
happening. Yes, exactly.
It's happening.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I find when I think about the whole world and how it's going to sort itself out, it's like too overwhelming. But it's like a good friend of mine used to say, like you can see all these starfish marooned on the beach, but and there could be thousands of them, but if you pick one up and throw it back in, you can at least make a difference to one starfish. And I just focus on having.
You don't have to save the world. That's a chapter in my next book that's coming out too. Is you were not expected to save the world. God didn't tell you have to save the world. You're just supposed to do what you can in your own little universe. And those are the people, and you probably know plenty of examples of those unsung heroes, the nannies or the whatever, who they're heroes and they're the bus drivers, and you never hear about them, but they're the ones who made the most difference.
Well, I think that was one of the good things about COVID is I think everybody got to see them because they were still out there doing it, and it became blindingly obvious. Well, certainly in our community of what value the nurses and the people who were out there kind of making the world work whilst many of us were stuck inside. And I think there was a deeper appreciation that emerged in many people for what needs to take place for society to still work, and how much care really does exist in every community for just the basic things that we take for granted every day to operate. And we may forget that again, but we'll have other opportunities to remind ourselves in the years ahead. It's it's interesting. This is like rarely does it ever end up being a conversation about technology. In the end, it often comes down to a conversation of what it means to be human, and what really matters at the end of it all for each and every one of us. And the more we all, live into something like that, the more the world is going to be okay. And there are amazing people everywhere, and that thing is growing, and unfortunately we don't necessarily get to see that in the news, but you walk around most communities, there are incredible stories of incredible people happening all the time.
Absolutely. And I wish the news would say, there's so many people doing so many great things out there. I know so many people, right? They are living their best, and they are optimistic, and they're not bitter, and they don't pay attention to the negative, and they're out there doing the right thing. But
the news is changing, right? The news has its function, it has its role, and
even that's decentralizing and democratizing. You're right.
Quite. So the fact that you're producing this content and this thing is testament to the way the world is changing, and that nobody needs permission from a news organization to tell new stories.
Like Alexis Ohanian, right? We don't have to ask the gatekeepers anymore. We can do this ourselves. So
there isn't really, there's no need to worry. That dynamic will continue if people step up and want to tell different stories. And so I see myths of possibility one coffee at a time, and those stories spread. There's whispers of, maybe this doesn't have to be as hard as we think.
And that's the first step, is we can make it better. We don't have to live like this. Wow.
But it's I understand that it's a frame of reference that isn't always easy in the face of what we consume, to see and feel that every day.
Negativity all day, sure.
But as I said, I get lost all the time. But I suppose I'm blessed that I have an inner guide or an inner compass in me that taps me on the shoulder every now and then and said, "Nah, maybe you're making this a bit too hard for yourself." I think it's.
I'm the king of making everything hard for myself.
But yeah, I mean, what if it was easy, right? And if we want for less and we care more, there's a life with new richness that gradually unfolds for each and every one of us. So
wow. Wow. All right, so Marc Winn, folks. Wow. We can. So we could either do a part 2 episode, or we can reconnect in a few months.
Happy to
here.
Yeah, there's no scarcity. I'm more than happy to do another episode. I can talk about this stuff. I do talk about this stuff all day. So in different ways from different perspectives. So more than happy to continue the take on another subject or something like that, and try and shift some struggle to ease.
Yeah, wow. So, here I am trying to democratize control of your technology. You're out there democratizing control of countries. Unbelievable.
Well, I mean, you've got to understand that the nation state is in itself a technology.
Wow.
And, it's a technology of human coordination, right? Governance is a technology. Much of that technology was designed in the era of the horse and cart. We've got to understand that democracy itself needs to go through a state shift, as it isn't designed to deal with scaling complexity, is breaking.
It's not scalable. It's not scale. Yes,
it is breaking under the consequences of what kind of multipolar world is arriving, and something with care needs to be built in the potential ashes of that system or systems. And so
I listened to a horoscope guy on YouTube the other day, and even he said, hey, in 2030, the world, all the things we used to trust are going to fall apart, and we have to learn how to enjoy life and move on. Apparently, this is a thing that's happening, right? This unsustainability is happening, and we have to figure out how to make these sustainable little things that are more resilient.
Yeah, because the things that aren't resilient to this scaling complexity will topple.
And that's a really good thing, because I've been worrying about this for so long. And
I think a lot about kind transition.
You're right. We don't want all of a sudden people shooting each other in the streets because something fell. Like the fall of the Soviet Union or whatever. That was relatively calm.
Yes, and so I'm and that's, I think, about care and making it easier and supporting people through the real discomfort of what those moments of collapse can be. Be it a collapse of an industry or a collapse of a local business, or like there's going to be a lot of things that need to regenerate, and a lot of people that need to regenerate, be it people going into crisis themselves, and things like that. So through the lens of the village, we have to take care of each other through this transition, and it is a transition. But with that lens of care, then we can make this transition to an abundant world, the move fast and break things mindset in Silicon Valley, whilst it's very clever and delivers a lot in a very short space of time, we just have to be conscious about how easy or hard those transitions are made as a result of that process. And touch more care wouldn't and working on some of these problems.
I'm so glad
in a wiser way. There are lots of people. There are lots of people around the world.
I'm so glad to know this.
That have different pieces of the puzzle. I say it's an 8 billion person puzzle, and we all have a piece.
I just feel for the past 10 years, especially working alone in my own business, I just felt like I'm the only guy in my city who just doesn't worship sports on a television set all day. Like,
well, I would say that's just not true.
I'm hoping other people out there who are youth critical thinking, right?
You just not find that
Yeah.
or intuitive feeling maybe. But they're there, and but ultimately we haven't found them yet. And certainly my community, when I stood up and hosted the first TEDx, 2014 or something like that, and said, how do we make Guernsey the best place to live on earth? 100 people showed up, and many of the people that I thought I'm the only person who thinks like this, blah, 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 I'm a lone sufferer, blah, blah, blah. But they were all, when I stood up and did something in my community, all the other people that thought like me arrived, and it was only my willingness to stand up and to express what my soul's desire was for my community that I find the people that were like me that already existed there.
You found the loose bricks like in Jenga, right? You found right. No, and I gotta say, I do appreciate, because my audience does tell me, hey, Mark, I remember I gave a talk last October, and a guy got up in the middle of it and goes, holy blank, you're thinking exactly you're saying exactly what we've all been thinking.
Yeah. And so it does take people to say it first, and then and that's the act of leadership. And then it takes people, the first follower is a leader as well. And I must have said I wanted to make Guernsey the best place to live on earth 50 times to different people and things like that. And the real act of leadership was the first, my co-founder, he was the first person to say, yes, let's do something about it. And then we hatched a plan to create an event and start, a new story in our community. But there's two acts of leadership there. Me to say that I want to bring this kind of world to light, and the first person to say, yeah, you're no longer a lone nut because I'll do it with you. And
you know what, too? Like with my clients, where they usually go with whatever abusive system they're in until they have a disaster. Then they're willing to call me, right? Hey, my last computer guy destroyed everything. I heard you were good. Can you come over? So in other words, when they finally have a disaster, and I've done in my own personal life, whenever I have a disaster, I become open to change and open to listening to something else. So your idea might work in a place like, let's say, Detroit, where the whole city's falling apart, an alarming percentage of houses are abandoned, blah, 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 where some kind of place where they have nothing left to lose. And
well, I would say Detroit, I think, as someone who's into community development and community transformation, has some of the most interesting community projects in the world. So that dynamic is already happening.
Okay, and I mean, I'm just saying something like that.
Yeah. So this is the incredible thing is about human beings. It's like you're just imagining what's already happening. You just haven't seen it yet because those stories don't reach you. And this is more to do with the algorithms, the information diets. Also, your own lens on what's possible, right? So as your because ultimately these algorithms are just a mirror of your own subconscious. And as your subconscious changes, you get different information. So it's playfully an opportunity for you to say, why did you not have more faith in the world, right?
And it's almost like an algorithmic version of manifestation, right? If I start clicking on positive videos, then I'll get more positive videos. It's just like if I start speaking positive, it's the same thing.
And now it's really linked, and there are some biases in that. But so I would say like there's incredible projects in a place like Detroit, and certainly ones that I'm inspired by, and there's awesome community builders in the world, and as I said, there's projects everywhere that are creating beacons of light for a different way of relating to each other and a way of bringing ourselves back. But there will be many cities that go through what somewhere like Detroit has gone through, as an old industry collapses and something else is reborn. And we're going to go through more of those transitions more often. And so we need to somehow get better at renaissance. and and accept it as part of the process of death and rebirth.
You're doing for government and countries what I'm doing for people's home computers. That's nuts.
It works at every level, right? You know,
the same concept. When you apply the same concept, it's nuts of giving people back their freedom and their sense of purpose.
Yeah, and so it's just as, I mean, you know, to have something as simple as having a computer work in your life. You know, I've seen how stressful that is. You know, it's a divine act, right? You know, to support someone to go from struggle to ease, to transform a life that way, and to do it with care.
It's so rewarding, right? And I'm just sick of picking up individual starfishes, and I want to pick up boatloads of starfishes, but it's so rewarding.
But you lose the connection sometimes that way,
right?
And you lose yourself in the process, and that becomes part of the problem. You know, part of this industrialized. And that's why I say we have to be more fractal about the way we change the world, which is,
and I always
keeping our human connection in the process.
Right, and I had a buddy 10 years ago, and he goes, bro, you could scale this, and you could have a national brand, and you could, and I said, I don't want that. I want to teach individual dudes out there my methods, and they go out there with their own brand name, because the connection between them and their client is just like a doctor-patient relationship, right?
Correct.
So teaching people,
that's fractal scaling. To me,
fractal scaling, got it.
It's because at all stage there's care.
Wow! Instead of that centralized scaling, which is what we're experiencing,
and so it's harder to scale. You know, you're scaling in a mind-based way rather than a heart-based way.
Right.
And for that,
because in the 1800s, it was always about economies of scale, right?
Yeah, and I talk about now economies of care.
Economies of care, dude. I'm running out of note paper.
So it's the whole story of economies of scale is an illusion.
Wow.
I feel, especially as technology gets more involved, it is, you know, our capacity, and you can see it in infrastructure and the bigger cities and the bigger countries and things like that. Ultimately, they get into this economies of scale thinking, and the problem with economies of scale thinking is you're using an extrinsic model to solve an intrinsic problem, which is
works great for rubber and glass, but it doesn't work for taking care of individual senior citizens, let's say.
Because you see when big organizations try to do those things, the care goes, and the magic is in the care. And so, you know, we have to build in a different way that puts intrinsic motivation, intrinsic care at the heart of the way we design and build our organizations. And that is about supporting people who care. You know, it is how do we create that web and that care. And I think,
intrinsic care.
And I think this is what, you know, the kind of slightly wrong direction that we've gone, and we can see some of the richness of the human experience has been lost in that process of, for all the right reasons, trying to save money, you know, scaling in that kind of way. But
what do you lose
what do you lose in the process? And there's a lot of cost that comes when people in organizations don't care about what they're doing.
Yeah, that impersonal touch. Wow, Marc Winn. Final thoughts. Tell us your website. I'm so blown away.
My website is marcwinn.com, and it's Marc with a C.
Like me.
Winn with a W-I-N-N, 2 N's, just to make it nice and easy. Reach out for a coffee. And we'll see what happens. But always happy to have a conversation.
Unbelievable. Yeah, you heard it here, folks. Marc Winn, MarcWinn.com. I am Mark Anthony Arena, and I am thecomputerexorcist.com. Tell your friends about the show. take a look at my book. Tell your friends about this guy right here. I'm going to try to connect you to any government people I know, and just unbelievable. I am so grateful you're here. I hope to keep in touch with you in the future, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.